Welcome to the Garage Network podcast. Join us and the occasional special guest as we discuss everything automotive, from fixing cars as a technician, owning an automotive workshop or business, overall work-life balance, and even the occasional laugh. In this episode of TGN Talks, we were joined by Tom Denton. Tom is an educator, author, and also an automotive technician. We'll learn a little bit about Tom, and also we talk about the evolution of the automotive industry. So we hope that you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome to another, what do we call this, an episode, what we call it, of the TGN Talks with our very special guest that we have. Not you, Jeff, sorry, mate, but our very special guest, Tom Denton. Good morning, Tom. How are we going?
And good morning. Yes, it's just approaching 10 o'clock in the morning here, and it's cold.
Yeah, well, the UK is not known for its greatest weather, but we deal with the cars we've got. It's all right. So I think you've got a bit of a treat for us today.
I hope so. I mean, I've got a presentation ready, Costa, where I'm going to talk about what I've done in my career, how I started writing books, and a little bit about different sorts of technologies. So like a general overview of loads of stuff. And, maybe if it's of interest to people, we can come back and dig a bit deeper on some of the technologies another time.
We have had a bit of feedback from some of the people that were waiting for this. They seem to be a bit excited. So
good.
I've handed the reins over to you, mate. So feel free to go. Well, you're going to talk about yourself anyway. So there's no real point introducing you too much because you're going to talk about that anyway. So I'll hand it right over to you.
Right. If I just, if you bear with me a minute, everybody, I'll just share my screen. I've got a little presentation ready to go here. I think that's the one I want to share. Share the screen. Hopefully you can see my PowerPoint presentation. I'll just make it full screen up there. Jeff, Costa, can you see that okay?
Yep, excellent, mate. You're all good
excellent.
To go.
Well, go for it. Let's go for it now. Well, good morning, everybody, and good evening. And thank you for inviting me along, first of all, to the group presentations. I've kind of met several of you, I think, before online, and more excitingly, some of you have already got copies of some of my books, which is really great to be spreading so far around the world. You'll be pleased to know I've just managed to do a deal with a local publisher as far as books are concerned, because I know postage from over here in the UK is a bit of a nightmare. So I've managed to arrange a deal, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later on, specifically for the Garage Network, by the way.
Excellent, thank you.
Anyway, I thought, where do I start? What do I present? My career, my CV, a bit about technology, a bit about where I think things are going, how things have changed, and so on. So in the end, I decided to try and cover everything in about 30 or 40 minutes, with a quick gloss over the three questions that you can see on the screen at the moment, like how I started in the trade, why and how I write books, and what has changed over the years. So that doesn't leave much out, does it, really? We can cover just about everything that's going on there. And just before we start in a bit more detail, let me answer those three questions. How I started in the trade, and the answer is with a Lambretta scooter on my mum's kitchen floor. Now, I bet that's not that unusual, is it really? We all kind of, got it in our system somehow. So that's where I started. Why and how I write books? Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I mean, how many careers are based on things like that? And then finally, what's changed over the years? Ooh, that's a hard one. I'd say lots and nothing. So I'll give a little bit more background on that when we come to it later. So there's the three very broad questions that I'm going to be kind of looking at as we're going along. So a little bit about my career, how I ended up doing what I'm doing, writing books and things like that, because it's a bit unusual, I guess. Then talk about different technologies, old and new, look at some of the changes that have taken place. And then, as we said, look at the textbooks and also an opportunity to ask questions at the end. But Costa and Jeff and I were just saying before we started, if any of you have any questions as we're going along, please type them in the usual way. And if they're appropriate at the time, we'll try and answer them. Or I might say, we'll come back to it later, you know. But if anything comes to mind, type them in, because we can, it's a good way of us all remembering them. And I'll if I can't get through all the questions today, I will do later on. Okay, that's the idea. So my career then, this is a bit like giving my CV away online, isn't it, really? So you're going to get everything here except my PIN number, which is 1234. Just in case you need it.
Just treat it like an interview, mate. Yeah.
Okay. So here's where I started. I can't remember the Australian equivalent, but over here in the UK, when I was a lad, anyway, the qualifications out of what we call secondary school at the age of 16 were O levels. And I ended up with about 4 O levels, but failed spectacularly my English A level. Now that has to say something, doesn't it? And I failed it with a grade 8. And at that time, the grades on qualifications were between grade 1, which meant you were really good, and grade 9, which meant you hadn't turned up or something. So I think I scored a grade 8, which was like getting points for like achieving my name at the top of the paper or something similar. Because I don't know. And I bet this is a bit similar with some of you guys, that it just didn't ever seem important to me at the time. You know, I could use my hands, I could do other things like metalwork at school, for example. I won the local prize, you know, for being best and things, and it was just what I wanted to do all the time. Anyway, for some obscure reasons of age, when I reached the end of what we call secondary school, I guess it's broadly similar, isn't it, at the age of 16, I wasn't quite old enough to leave school, so I had to stay on a little bit longer. So I stayed on for A levels, which normally take you through the 17 and 18 and then go on to university. And I got effectively 3/4 of the way through my A levels. And my best friend at the time said, I know, shall we join the army? And I thought, that sounds like a good idea. So we left school, and this is a bit like swimming, you know, 3/4 of the way across the English Channel, turning round and swimming back because we couldn't quite make it or something. But, you know, I've done all that study. And anyway, long story short, we joined the army. And then here in the UK, the sort of engineering side of the army is called the REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. And that's, to cut a long story short, when I did my trade training, got to visit a few obscure places around the world and absolutely loved it. Absolutely had a ball for about 6 years. Met the wife at the time, still with her, and left and started my own business, self-employed, a man in a van. You know, some of you guys might still be doing this, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And Kelvin and Auto Electrics, I was called, because my primary trade was always at the start anyway, automobile electrics and electronics and things like that. I progressed through the motor trade. Again, this won't be an unfamiliar route to a lot of people. I had what I'd call kind of a backstreet garage, if you like. Nothing wrong with that. It was just, you know, off the beaten track. And then progressed on from there to quite a nice garage on the high street and different things like that. And at that time, joined in with a couple of partners. And you know, and went on with that for doing general repairs and diagnostics and all the rest of it for several years. I then decided I would want to do something else. The different things happen to you throughout your career, don't you? And this particular one, it was still working on a Sunday morning, I think. And one of the contracts we had at the time was to look after a fleet of like road construction vehicles. And one of them, it was like a tar sprayer of some sort. They sprayed out like molten tar out the back and put grit on it or something. And a Sunday morning, this bloody thing had broken down So I was trying to get the starter motor off with all this crap and everything dripping in my eyes. And I thought, I wonder if I want to keep doing this forever. And I decided at that point that I didn't. I wanted to just make some changes of some sort. So again, long story short, I then went to work at a main dealer. And this dates me a little bit, doesn't it? At that time, it was an Austin Rover dealer. And the less said about all of that, I know, the better. But at that time, I started doing some part-time teaching, which I really enjoyed. And again, kind of moving quickly on, that part-time teaching moved into a full-time job. And in 1992 is when I first started writing my books, which I'll come back to in a second. I developed through as a senior lecturer, head of engineering, and so on. And then decided about 10 years after starting teaching, time to do something else. You're beginning to see a pattern here, I think. And I sort of left and was self-employed as a consultant, doing all sorts of different things, and still writing my books, of course. And then started a company to develop some e-learning. And that sort of grew and grew and did very well. And finally, that e-learning company, or the e-learning itself, we sold to an organisation called the Institute of the Motor Industry, which is our kind of representative body over here in the UK. The IMI sets qualifications, sets national standards, and all sorts of things like that. So that's what happened. And therefore, I went to work for them for a few years. And finally, where I am now, I'm a self-employed writer. I write articles and obviously the books, keep working, a consultant in general things, and still learning. And it always makes me sort of interested, I hark back because I introduced that I'd failed my English O level right at the beginning. And since then, I think I've written over 40 books. I've studied a technology degree. I've studied postgraduate teaching courses. And I'm a fellow of a lot of institutes and all sorts of things like that. So never say never. When the time is right, you can do different things and move on. We all, I don't know, develop at different times. What's the old saying that education's wasted on the young, or something like that? And it really is. I still sort of learn stuff every day. I see online webinars come up from different companies and things, and I join in and so on. So there we go then, guys. That's my career, like 1973 to date, or as my daughter would describe it when I go on about the olden days, is, oh yeah, Dad, when everything was in black and white. Well, she's not too far wrong, really, is she? I don't know.
I was about to say that's a lot to fit in just 10 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, mate. I'll definitely do this again. So, preempting a little question here is that something I often ask myself. I mean, you might all do it, I don't know. But if I had my time over again, would I change any of this sort of list of things that I've done? And fundamentally, I would say no, because every little thing, you get a different bit of experience, and without that experience, you couldn't always sort of move on to something else. But I guess just with hindsight is that at this sort of time here, when I had the backstreet garage and the high street garage, I was sort of desperate to get a partner to work with, or two partners as it happened at the time to work with, so that when I wasn't there, somebody was still manning the phones and, looking after the place and so on. With hindsight, I maybe should have stuck it out on my own a little bit longer. But that's all. Apart from that, great experience. Wouldn't really change anything.
Can I ask why? Just on that topic, what
yeah,
or is that something you'd rather not discuss?
No. I mean, it is something I discussed, and I mean, I talk about it in other sessions and things like that, because it is a big choice that we all make, isn't it? As we're going through, I guess a lot of the guys on here are kind of self-employed or working in partnerships and things like that. I mean, to start with, it was great, but my view of the trade is that I've always wanted to kind of give an image of working at the top end, having all the top gear, kit, the top qualifications. If you want a good job done, come here, you'll get one, but you'll pay well. Yep. If you don't want that, then go somewhere else, And sort of pick my piece. Well, I don't know what's the right word, but my slice of the market. That's what I
Your
want.
niche.
Somebody.
Yeah.
That's a niche. That's the sort of word, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. My two partners were a bit more. How can I describe this quietly? Well, less interested in that, and were almost willing to do, any work that came through the door. And, any work that came through the door was often bad work. It was the sort of thing that you could see was going to go wrong and things like that. We'd end up working late to put things right that had gone wrong and things like that. So we never fell out. It was all okay. But I guess my view on the way I wanted the business to go was different from their view. So we parted ways. And, I bet that's not an unfamiliar story either with a lot of our friends in the group here.
I think it's all too familiar, mate. All too familiar.
Yeah, that's it. But as I say, nonetheless, the experience was just amazing. So I wouldn't change it. Anyway, switching in a slightly different direction now, I thought we'd look at some old technologies as we're going back to the days of black and white. And here's a kind of almost a random list. I'm not trying to cover everything and in the world here, but the sort of thing that right at the start, we actually used to work on magnetos. I bet some people have never even heard of a magneto. What a magneto is it's like a generator, an ignition coil, a distributor, and contact breakers all in one little unit. In many cases, about as big as this. So it's always something that could fit on the engine. Fascinating pieces of technology, some of these old things, because at the time, magnetos actually used to be used on quite advanced racing cars. Because the next thing on my list there, which is sort of contact breakers, ignition, and things like that. The downside, as many of you will know, with an ignition system, the old ones anyway, is that the faster the engine goes, the weaker the spark gets, because you don't have as much time available to charge up, if you like, the ignition coil. Again, these are all details we can dig into another time. With a magneto, as you can imagine, like with a generator or an alternator, the faster you go, the more electricity it makes. So actually, the spark from the magneto would stay strong even at very high engine revs, and therefore they were used on quite sophisticated racing cars and high performance engines and different things like that. So interesting to go back to these technologies. And what I always find is how much what we first think of as an old technology, how it often comes round again. We see it again and things like that. Anyway, the lovely old contact breakers. The good thing about contact breakers, it used to provide lots of work in vehicle recovery, didn't it? Because everybody used to drive around and forget to put a little bit of grease on the camshaft, and the contact breaker would wear down, close up, the car would break down. And we could turn up with with a set of feeler gauges and a screwdriver and adjust it and set it going again, and people would think we were wonderful. Well, we are wonderful, aren't we? But, it was as easy as that. Of course, mixed in with contact breakers with strange ideas like centrifugal and vacuum advance. And this was all about changing and setting the timing of the ignition exactly as the engine needed it, although it wasn't very exact at all with all these old, things like that. I mean, funnily enough, just before we started this presentation, we were laughing because I was saying about some of the old tools that I've still got in my shed, and I've still got my timing light. And I mean, you never know, do you? Tomorrow, somebody might just need their timing doing, so I'm hanging on to it. Anyway, another one of my favorite areas, dynamos and control boxes. There's dynamos and control boxes here. Like before alternators appeared, used to generate DC current and have this complex, we used to call them like 2 bobbin and 3 bobbin control boxes, or current voltage control boxes and all sorts of things like that. I used to love that. And that used to have like a mechanical setup procedure for setting vibrating contacts and different things like that. Great fun. A thing called an inertia starter motor, not pre-engaged. I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. And then this unusual device called a carburetor. I mean, we barely even see these sort of things anymore, but of course, a fuel and air mixing device, but they became ever more complex and more complex and more complex. And of course, if you think that a modern fuel injection system is complex, you know, some of the like later carburetor systems were, I'd argue, even worse because of all that they had on them. And then just to be a bit random here, I put a speedo cable because I don't know if there's any modern car still has a speedo cable on it. I mean, somebody might know better. There's always an exception somewhere, isn't there? But, you know, speedo cables, even something as fundamental as that, you know, has gone away. And I suppose what reminded me of the speedo cable really was that how I used to remember a fault that occurred on many vehicles really, and that you would turn the key to crank the engine over, and instead of the engine starting, the speedo cable would burn out, and people used to be sort of completely mystified by what would cause this. And again, long story short here, it usually meant that the earth connection between the chassis of the vehicle and the engine itself, which is normally a big sort of earthing strap of some sort, had corroded or come loose or whatever. So the whole starter motor current was trying to transfer itself through the speedo cable. So there you go. There's a blast from the past. Anyway, the final thing I put on my list here is unit repairs. And I know I've done a sort of a fairly random list of things, but one of the things I do remember way back in the day is that we actually used to have a go at repairing loads of things, you know. So a gearbox would be making a whining noise, so we would pull a gearbox apart, fit new bearings, or, you know, check the backlash on the gears with feeler gauges and fit new things like that. Starter motors, alternators, all of these sort of things, I would repair them rather than replacing. And it feels to me now that we don't do anywhere near as much of that. You know, if the gearbox is gone, put a new gearbox in or put a new alternator on and things like that. And it just got me thinking, really. I don't know the answer to this, why we don't do it. Is it the technology that's changed? Are these things so complex we don't want to touch them anymore? Is it us that's changed? You know, we just want to get the job done and get it out of the door. Or is it the customers that have changed? Is it the expectation that when our vehicles drive out of the door, they'll be perfect? You know, whereas before we could say to somebody, well, look, we'll try putting some new bearings in and see what happens. But if that doesn't work, we might have to do something else. I can't really imagine having that conversation with modern customers somehow. So maybe that's where the change is. I don't know. I mean, you know, if you've got any thoughts or ideas, just let us know, because it's an interesting topic, really, isn't it? But unit repairs. Anyway, here's just a range of pictures of some of the things that I've been talking about, especially for you youngsters that might not have seen all this old crap before. So I'll just go around them very quickly. I mean, this is an inertia type starter motor, whereas this little pinion here was engaged by the spin of the motor, caused it to engage. Yeah,
we do have a question there, Tom, or I should say a comment on your last point. Mr. Chad Chapman says labour costs exceeding the part replacement cost is
I mean that's definitely a big thing.
Which I would agree with. In most cases, sometimes the time it takes to rebuild something, your cost can definitely increase than just buying a new one.
Doing it. I'm sure that's a big thing. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that one. I still think there's possibly a few areas where there's a bit of a crossover, but that's a very good point. Yeah. So this device here, this is the Magneto. It's basically just a great big horseshoe magnet. This is a very early one. What else have we got here? Contact breaker, ignition. There's the speedo cable that I was talking about. Even this little guy here, which is a Hall effect distributor, so electronic ignition distributor, started to disappear, really. An old-fashioned ignition coil. We don't see anything that looks anything like that anymore, I don't think, do we? And this strange-looking device here, this is like an instrument gauge, so it's like a fuel gauge or a temperature gauge, something like that. And it was a type that was called moving iron, and it was quite an early one. And if you've ever had any old cars where when you switch the ignition on, the little dials of the temperature gauge or fuel gauge go boing and sort of, wobble about like that, and then, eventually almost keep still. That's usually an old moving iron gauge. It was basically like two windings in opposite directions, you can just about see there. And one winding effectively connected to the power supply, and the other winding was affected by the sender unit in the tank or whatever. And that's how the little dial moved up and down. Anyway, I just thought I'd show here just for fun. That's an old carburettor, if you like, and a much newer version of a carburettor. And you can see the complexity of pipes and vacuums and little plungers and diaphragms and goodness knows what that were involved in that. So, things have arguably got a lot better since we got fuel injection, but there you go. Okay, let's flick on a few more things. So I'm just going to look at some new technologies now just to see what's happening very quickly. I'm going to look at ICE or internal combustion, then electric vehicles, and then even a very quick look at automated driving vehicles. And again, these are the areas that we can come back and do a much more in-depth presentation on, some other time, if you wish. I've highlighted a word at the top of this one, efficiency, because actually that's what it's all about with whether we're using a petrol engine in a vehicle, a diesel engine, an electric motor or whatever. It's all about trying to get more out of the available energy in the fuel, for example. So here's a few sort of modern things that I've just pulled together to try and see what's happening in this area. Here's a really interesting one called active valve train, where each of the valves, instead of having a camshaft, each valve effectively operates via a solenoid of some sort. It can tend to use oil pressure to help it open and close and things like that. And it's one of the few areas, isn't it, of a internal combustion engine that we don't have under electronic control. We have variable cam timing, for example, and we have like some mechanical things that perhaps prevent a valve opening now and then, on, I don't know, use 4 cylinders in the town and 8 cylinders on the motorway or something. So we've got bits like that. But with active valve train, where each valve is controlled by a solenoid, that allows full electronic control to operate. So quite interesting how it goes on. Another big area is what I've called thermal management. Most modern cars, when you open the bonnet or the hood on these things now and look underneath, there's little or no space for anything, and that causes a lot more thermal type problems, heating and cooling and things like that. And with thermal management, it's as much about heating things up as it is about cooling things down, how different things have to change. So the quicker we can get an engine up to the ideal operating temperature, and the more accurately we can hold it at that temperature, then you get greater efficiency out of it and so on. Now, this particular device here is from an Audi, I think, and it's the water pump. But I think it's got something like 6 different valves built into it at the same time. So, you can operate a valve that sends water down, coolant, around slightly different routes and all sorts of things. Very complex device. And that's just what we'd have called the cooling system, I guess. Next one on my list, GPS and connectivity. Connectivity is arguably going to be one of the next big things about, one car will tell another car when it's in a traffic jam or something like that and reroute around it and so on. That's perhaps, more in the big towns and the like, but certainly important. But a very interesting thing I found out about GPS technology a little while ago is that there are some systems almost in use but being developed where, because the vehicle knows what sort of terrain is coming up next, so in other words, is it going to go up a hill or is it going to go down a hill, the vehicle will actually prepare itself for an event that's coming a little bit further down the road. So it might, change gear or something at the bottom of the hill and different things like that. It's more leading towards the automated driving system, but nonetheless, it can react to switch an engine off at the top of the hill and coast down to the bottom or something like that. What have we got here? SCR selective catalytic reduction, along with diesel particulate filters and all sorts of things like that. I'm sure the same happened over there, but here the poor old diesel engine got a terrible press a little while ago. Not that long ago, we were all told that diesel was the future, so we all bought diesel engines, and then diesel fuel went up in price, so we didn't like it anymore. And then it was dirty because it produces more emissions, and it produces, in particular, soot and things, you know. So, it was all naughty. It was heinous crime, you know, to drive a diesel engine.
Now it's the naughty
interestingly, sorry, mate?
Now it's naughty to drive a diesel.
Yeah, that's right. But having said that, in the process, you know, the big companies have developed systems that actually make them cleaner than they've ever been. So, you know, people say, should I buy an electric vehicle now? So, well, really depends what you're doing. You know, if you're doing sort of several 100-mile journeys, probably not. Just get yourself a good diesel. You know, it's still the best option. But it's just another interesting thing of how things change, isn't it? Anyway, just rolling on quickly, because conscious of the time. Rolling resistance. You know, there's still a lot of work going on in tyres. And this particular one from, I think it was Continental, I can't remember, but they reckon that the rolling resistance of this tyre can save 3 or 4% on either fuel or on, batteries if it's in an EV and things like that. So there's a lot of work going on with these things. One that I quite like here, this one is an e-turbocharger. So it's still got the turbine and the compressor as normal, but it's got like a little motor generator built in between the two and connects to a high volt battery, a minimum of about 48 volts, but higher the better. And this is a way of completely eliminating turbo lag, so that as soon as there's a big demand from the throttle, obviously there's a delay before the exhaust pressure and speed gets up. So the motor spins up the compressor and so on and so forth. And there's even times when there's a lot of exhaust going out when you don't need anything doing, and you can get the exhaust to drive the generator and actually recharge the batteries from it a little bit. That's
really cool. That is really cool.
It's lots of things still happening and so on. Last but not least, I don't know all the details of it yet, because I only caught it briefly in a presentation the other day, but in a petrol engine, they're talking about something called jet ignition. And the upshot of all of this really is that it's still a great advantage within the petrol engine to run the mixture, generally speaking, as lean as possible. Because when you can really run the mixture lean, in other words, less petrol compared to the air, you can usually get a lot more efficiency out of it and less emissions and things like that. It's not quite straightforward, but that's the general idea. Well, this is a way of, with an ignition system and injection system, of effectively stratifying the charge, fuel air charge. So you get a nice rich piece of mixture just next to the spark plug, and then you can cause that to ignite and another ignition event somewhere else and so on. So, you know, it's a bit like lighting a great big fire with a match. You know, you choose the right little piece to light and the whole thing will burn a lot better. So there we are. Quick overview of some modern technologies, just to show that the old ICE engine ain't dead yet. You know, there's a lot of life left in it. Anyway, now to look at EVs, electric vehicle futures. I don't know how much this is impacting you guys yet, but here in the UK, there's market out there. About 5 or 6% of all the vehicles out there now have got some form of high voltage on them. And we've also got legislation that says anything except plug-in hybrids must not be sold after 2030. So we're really, really pushing towards the electric vehicle route over here. You know,
we've also
one of the advantages of being small, I guess, isn't it? You know,
we've also had a big uptick. I think these years' sales came through with quite a large increase in EV and hybrid sales. It was huge.
Yeah,
big increase this year.
I mean, I think the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is this is the way that we're all going. You know, this is what's going to happen. You know, I drive a plug-in hybrid, so like half electric, half hybrid, if you like, that I can charge up. And particularly over the last year or two, I don't think I've hardly used any petrol. I've just sort of driven it around on its battery all day long, and things like that. And it's really a big saving, and they are awesome to drive once you get used to an electric vehicle. I mean, I'm being provocative here because I know some of the guys out there, so I'm doing this to wind people up. I mean, but electric vehicles are way better than old internal combustion engines.
All right, so everyone's actually left the video chat.
Have they all gone?
Yeah, they're all gone.
Anyway, please comment.
Let us know if you'd like to see Tom again. Yeah.
So anyway, just again, some of the sort of things that are happening, just to get people an idea. Higher voltages are being used. I mean, 400 volts is typical now, but there are a lot of vehicles coming out at 800 volts. And, I don't want to turn back to a science lesson. Those of you that know will know this sort of equation here. But in simple terms, if you double the voltage in a system, you can knock the amount of current that's flowing in half and therefore reduce the losses in the system. Or you can use thinner wires and the whole thing becomes lighter weight and stuff like that. So there's a lot of advantages to 800 volt systems. The biggest advantage, I think, is that on a 400 volt system, you touch the wrong things, you will die, but you might die slowly and with a little bit of pain and things like that. But with an 800 volt system, you'll probably die instantly. And that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it, really? If you've got to go, you might as well go out with a bang of some sort, or a flash, one of the
So what
two.
you're saying, your option is the 800 volts?
Yeah, my car's 400 volts at the moment, and I can assure you I'm still very careful when touching any of that. Modularization, I think, will become a bigger thing, whereby you'll have like a chassis system here, which these are all the batteries in the middle of it and the motor and everything else built in. And then it'll have different bodies put on top of it. And I think manufacturers will even start sharing chassis, and you'll get a different, you'll get a Volkswagen top on it or a Ford top on it or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens. 48 volt systems are still going strong or becoming stronger. And here's a 48 volt Audi. And that's basically a relatively small battery and a little unit on the side of an internal combustion engine that can be used to provide additional power from the battery. And it can also be used for this thing called regenerative braking, so that when you're pressing the brakes, you collect some of the energy instead of throwing it away. But like I said, all these details, another session, another time, perhaps. Higher power and higher energy batteries. This is a battery here with all sorts of internal cooling pipes and things in it. I think this is actually from Porsche. And the thing about batteries is that you want them to hold more power so you can go further, basically. But also, if a battery has a higher energy figure, then it also means you can charge it more quickly. And that's obviously a big thing. We want to be able to pull in and plug our car in for 10 minutes while we get a coffee and then drive on, much like you do in a fuel station. And that's coming and that's happening.
That'll be the game changer.
Of course. Say again, mate?
I think that'll be a bit of a game changer. The speed of charge,
It certainly will, the quick charge. Even 20 minutes as a charge would be amazing, wouldn't it? Because, you need a break at the time anyway. The technical challenges of this, of course, are that when you fast charge a battery, it can get very hot very quickly. And again, it's about thermal management and controlling it, and hence all this cooling pipes and stuff. New motor designs. This picture here is like a typical hybrid. It's actually from a hybrid motor, where I don't know how well you can see it on the screen there. But basically, these windings on here are wound radially, so that you imagine a radius coming out from the central shaft, and the windings are sort of around it that way. Whereas this motor is known as an axial motor. So the direction of the windings is the same as the axis of the motor, which the company who make this motor say, anyway, of course, that it's a whole lot better than the previous designs. And even simple things like this little picture at the bottom is representing how if you change the types of windings from round ones to sort of square or rectangular ones, you can fit more copper within the same space. And that makes things more efficient. And this sort of change is going on all the time. Everything's happening out there.
We do have a question on that as well. So we've got a question coming from Stephen. Can you see the ice coming to an end in the near future? And also any talk about some synthetic fuels that you know
of? Yeah, that's kind of that's a massive question. It's a good question, but it's a massive question in a way. Yes, I can see ice coming to an end, but over a period of time, as I say, over here in the UK anyway, legislation will stop pure ICE vehicles being sold in 2035. So from then onwards, only full electric cars will be sold. Now, like all government legislation, that'll change 8 times before we actually get to it. But nonetheless, the target is to stop selling internal combustion engine cars. The internal combustion engine will live a lot longer, in my opinion, in heavy vehicles and trucks and things like that, because they don't lend themselves to electric components in quite the same way. Hydrogen is a topic a lot of people say, oh, hydrogen is the only future. That's definitely a subject we'd have to come back to another time, because that's big. Synthetic fuels, I mean, it is possible by, generating electricity from hydro or solar or whatever to effectively make fuel out of the air. You make some hydrogen out of some water and you take some carbon dioxide of the air and you mix it together in a test tube or something. I don't quite know how it works, but something like that. And you make a synthetic hydrocarbon fuel. And, if it's constructed correctly, then you can put it in an internal combustion engine and away you go. The downside of that is that, first of all, the infrastructure necessary to create all of this fuel would be enormous.
Yeah.
You would still then have to distribute it around the country in tankers, for example, which is a loss of efficiency. And it can also affect how all of the engines work. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of our petrol when we buy it now is known as like E5 or E10.
Yeah.
And that means it's got a certain amount of ethanol in that's made out of sugar cane or trees or something.
Yeah.
And if you go beyond these figures, then the car can't quite cope with it. You need to move the car to dual fuel capabilities. So to me, the different fuels, the synthetic fuels.
Synthetic fuels, yeah.
Is a great kind of idea, and it will happen, and it is a good thing to do, but I don't see it as the solution to the carbon dioxide problem, which is really what we're coming down to here. But again, I mean, that's a great question, and it really is something we can come and do another time.
It can be a huge topic in its own, yeah.
It's huge, isn't it? It really is. Anyway, I'm going to try and hustle ahead. I'm conscious of how much time I use. I usually do because I get so excited about my subject. I like to keep going. Anyway, autonomous vehicles and automatic driving vehicles. I mean, what's going to happen here, really? But my view would be that a fully autonomous car is decades and decades away yet, no matter how we dress it up out on the main road. Because remember, an autonomous vehicle is one that can do everything that you or I can do when we sat in a car. So it goes down a little tiny country road and comes nose to tail with another car that's broken down. It has to be able to reverse out or do what we do, hang its head out the window and yell at the driver to get a move on and all sorts of things like that, So that's a long, long way ahead. So to me, what will actually happen is that the driver assistance or advanced driver assistance, ADAS, that will continue to grow, so we'll have more help for an existing driver. Again, we won't go into the details now because of time, but in the automatic driving or autonomous vehicles, there are 5 different levels, or arguably 6 if you count 0, of levels of automation, where only level 5 is fully autonomous. But today, only really level 2 vehicles, whereby the vehicle can control steering and braking, for example, active cruise control, and a little bit of steering on a motorway or something. Really, that's the stage that we're at the moment. So we've got a long way to go before we get to properly autonomous vehicles. So, as I say, I'm just introducing it for fun and at another time. One of the reasons I think it's a long time away is, don't bother trying to read all of this because it's probably too small to read, but in sequence from the top left here down to the bottom right, this is broadly speaking what happens when you and I are driving down the road, a single road, and we want to turn right across traffic that's coming towards us. So, we're driving at a suitable speed. The GPS tells us where to go. We've got to think how far it is to start turning. We've got to check the position of other vehicles, decide the best options, adjust speed and position. What have we got? Check for changes in the traffic, indicate the distance, move to the right side, so on and so forth. All of these sort of things have to be calculated very quickly. We do it by instinct, don't we, as we're driving. We also know, oh, I'm still rolling a little bit here, so I can just swing through that little gap, and I'm gone and so on. But, of course, an automated car has to do all of this many times over itself, and it does it by this process that we call sense, understand, and act. So in other words, it has to sense everything that's going on, but make sense of it, understand it, then act and make the turn and things like that. And, it can't see the big pothole that's just round the corner and all sorts of things like that. So there's a long way to go in automated vehicles. But hey, keep making the ADAS systems more complex as far as I'm concerned. An interesting thing that happens in our trade is there's 2 ways of seeing things, aren't there? The more complex things get, the better. The less the guy can fix on his drive, and the more he has to bring it to you and I.
The more stuff we can fix. I've always said the exact same thing. The more they add, the more they can break, the more that we can fix.
Absolutely. Love it.
Keep it going.
Anyway, does our trade really change over the years? And this is where I started off, yes and no. Yes. Here's a really old circuit from a vehicle that I think is the complete wiring system for the entire vehicle, this one on the left. The one on the right this is even about 5 or 6 years old, even now, this particular one is just the lighting system of, in fact, just the headlighting system, come to that, not even the rear lights on a vehicle. And you can see the complexity of extra wiring. And of course, this particular one works with local internet, local interconnect network, LIN, and all sorts of things like that. So yes, in this respect, things have become more complex. But still, to make something work on this one, you put a switch on and it takes the power supply from one wire, sends it down another wire and turns the lights on or something. So the fundamental principles don't change. Have things got better or worse? Way better in my opinion. How many broken down cars do we see along the sides of the roads now compared to those of us that are old enough 30 years ago or something like that? It used to be quite common to, see cars with the bonnet open, steam and smoke coming out of them and things. It still happens, of course, but nowhere near as much, your average car now is 50 miles per gallon instead of 20 miles per gallon and things like that. What else is the same? Servicing is much the same. But what about diagnostics? Has that changed? In my opinion, no. Some of the tools we might have to use to diagnose faults with cars have changed fairly radically. An old headlight bulb soldered onto 2 wires to do some circuit testing is not really adequate anymore. But nonetheless, things have not changed radically. And again, here's another subject that's a whole lecture in its own right, isn't it? Talking about, the stages of diagnostics and what we do. We verify things, we collect evidence, evaluate, test, rectify, check that we haven't broken anything, and go around the circle. This kind of route of diagnostics. So nothing has changed really. We need new kit. We need an understanding of how the kit works. We need an understanding of how the vehicle works and how the circuits work and things. But the actual skills that we apply, I'm not sure they've changed really. You may think differently. Anyway, guys, sorry, I'm at 45 minutes already, so I'll keep rolling just for 5 more minutes if that's okay. Little bit about textbooks now, which is perhaps why you invited me in the first place. I don't know, but I've talked about everything else, so I better finish off with this. So when, why, how, why did I get in all of these sort of things? Well, I actually started my textbook writing with this book, Automobile Electrical and Electronic Systems, in 1992. And that has morphed into this monster of over 600 pages over the years. And I know some of you got this because I remember signing them and sending them off. Why did I start doing it? Because it was a way to learn. I also started doing it because some bloke came into our staff room when I was in the college and said, anybody fancy writing a book about auto electrics? And I've always suffered from this problem, is that my hand was up and I volunteered before I realised what was going on. And anyway, as they say, that's all history. I also thought it was an opportunity for a new career. And as I've said here, I tend to volunteer and so on. But, when you start with this sort of thing, it's huge. Where do I actually start? How do you pull together a book of this size? Oh, and incidentally, I'll just share one more thing before I start, is that when the commissioning editor found me in 1992 and we agreed the details and things like that, he said, whatever you do, don't write textbooks to earn money, because there isn't enough money in it. If you want to earn money, go and work in McDonald's flipping burgers or something, because over the years, you'll earn more money for that amount of time. And I have to say, he was absolutely right. Now, I'm not complaining here. I'm happy with doing what I do. But, when one of these books sells on Amazon, for example, I earn just over £1. What's that? $2 or something? $2 or $3 maybe. That's it. That's what an author gets out of a book. And all the rest goes to Amazon and the distributors and the publishers and everything else. So, even if I sell a few thousand books, it's a few £1,000s, and it's nice, but it's hardly money that you could live on for the year. So it's certainly not something I do to live on, although it forms part of my income. And as I say, I'm not complaining. But what the books have done for me is that they've opened up doors to everything else. So consultancy work that I get, where I charge, proper day working money and things like that. And they've got me all the other jobs and things that I did along the way. So I wouldn't ever be without it. And it was a great decision at the time. And certainly not one of the ones I would change a little bit. But anyway, just quickly now into how the hell do you start with something so big? And here's the answer. Don't tell everybody, or else we'll all be kind of writing books soon.
You've made it sound attractive. So a lot of work, no money. It sounds like they'll be running for it.
Yeah, it's true, actually, yes. I suppose, Costa, one of the things is I'm still a teacher at heart. Yeah. I love teaching things. And, even with my books, I'm a teacher. I'm still teaching and helping people learn new things. And, and some of you guys out there will do that. And it's a good buzz when you can get that right. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Else. But anyway, in very simple terms, what I do here is, you sort of cut the vehicle, if you like, down to, the vehicle in a way, yeah, but the book into sections. So I'll start with a title here. So this one could be something like Automobile Electrical Systems, and this one could be another book completely, Mechanical Systems or something like that. And then what I do is, from once I know what the title is and what I'm doing, is split it up into chapters. Now that's obvious, isn't it? Chapter 1 will be introduction, chapter 2, basic electrics, chapter 3, electronics or something like that. So, I literally write all these things out as a list, usually an indented list, as we go down the system. And then for each chapter, I split the chapter up into different topics. So if I've got a chapter called, I don't know, ignition systems, then the first topic will be something like introduction. The second topic might be something about how the coil works, or different types of coil, different types of ignition system, and so on and so forth. So again, you like writing all these headings in. Then once again, underneath the topic of, let's say, how a coil works, you might have lots of smaller sections underneath there, which again will be some kind of introduction. The second one along would be maybe, how a transformer works, what transformer action is, or something like that, which is how a coil works. And then different types of coil, and high voltage coil, performance coils, cooling of ignition coils, and different types of ignition. So what we got, distributor type ignition, distributor-less ignition, direct ignition, coil and plug ignition, different things like that. So all those little topics. Then once again, split that up into smaller sections down at the bottom. And then when I've got this, what actually now ends up as a ginormous list of stuff, then basically go back and fill in all the little gaps, right, and find the pictures that go with it, and everything else like that. So it's, it's called a task decomposition. So I try to break it down, and then some of the things I will know out of my head how they work, so I just write it. Or nowadays I can go back to some old material and copy it in again and things. And other things I don't know how it works, so I have to go and research and find out and do things like that. So there we go. That's the general idea. So it's all about slice it up into ever smaller pieces, and then it makes some kind of structure. And then obviously later down the line, it's perfectly easy to move this topic over to there, or move this section up there if you think it works better. But that's the general idea.
Makes sense.
Okay, almost finally then, guys. Here's the list of different books I've got available at the moment. So alternative fuels, electrical systems, diagnostics, electric vehicles, mechanical, and automated and ADAS. And then this book here that hasn't even come out yet. It's due out on the 22nd of September, I think, that one. And for the very first time, I'm working with a co-author, an apprentice, if you like, so that I can gradually hand over the reins as I decide I don't want to do any work anymore. Now, this particular one is specifically aimed at students in college, or students in training, facilities, wherever they are, because it's step by step, learn this. When you've learned that, do that. Activities built in and things like that. For our audience today, these are the sort of books that are probably of most interest. So if you're really into EVs and want to know more, then this one. A very popular one is the diagnostic book. So we talk about diagnostics as a science and so on. So yeah, and this book here is, I've lost count, is actually the 40-something different book that I've published. This one is in its fifth edition, second edition, and so on. So I'm counting new editions, but that's a lot. So there you go. We've flashed through a whole range of stuff. I hope I haven't bored you too much in that. I'll get you going for 55 minutes, and that was longer than I intended, but I still love the subject, as you can probably tell. It's fascinating. When it comes to customers, I'm less enamored sometimes, but we have to learn techniques and ways of dealing with people, don't you? And there's another lecture all in its own right, isn't it?
That's series 2 of this episode, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So that's it, Joe. So everybody, whether you've got any further questions or final questions, please throw them in.
I've got a couple of comments and questions, so I might just go through them all. So we've got Peter Leondis, who's actually one of the other directors of the Garage Network. He's saying he'd be keeping an eye on hydrogen fuels, the hydrogen space in the near future, he believes. We've got Mike.
We'll do a session on that, and I'll tell him he's wrong.
Okay, excellent, perfect. I love proving people wrong. It's so much fun.
No, I might not. wrong in certain instances.
Right. One for next time. We've got Mike Cunnamulla as well. Again, one of the other directors of the Garage Network. How can we have autonomous cars when we can't have autonomous planes? So he believes planes will probably come first before the cars do.
Yeah. I'll tell you one of the challenges, and I mean, again, we're hitting subjects that are the whole thing on their own, aren't they?
Correct.
And I think you're probably right, but I think partly I'd argue that most like big planes are almost already autonomous. The pilots are sat in there for when things go wrong, but there's a huge amount of autonomy. And I heard an interesting figure, and this was from a director of BMW the other day, is that an autonomous car, when it's traveling down the high street of a town somewhere, and it travels around a bit, collects several terabytes of data and has to react to it. And an aeroplane doesn't collect anywhere near that amount of data. It's just like, go up into the sky, turn left, and fly in a straight line for a while. It's a lot easier. So I think I'm agreeing here, aren't I? I think
there we go.
Perhaps airplanes will become more autonomous. But there's an interesting debate to be had here about this, and again, we can come back to it another time. And it's a phenomenon known as technology push or social pull. And are we kind of, as consumers, are we demanding that we should have autonomous cars, or is the technology being pushed on us?
Yeah,
and I think we're sort of doing it because we can at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want an autonomous car. Do you want one?
I never knew I wanted one until I saw them. So realistically, no, there was no real demand. I think they've created the demand, haven't they?
People say things like, well, look, you could just get your phone out and go tap, 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 and a car would turn up at the end of my drive. And I get in the drive and it will take me somewhere and leave me there and go on. And my argument to that is, well, yes, I've got that now. It's just that I call it a taxi.
Yeah.
So
it's already here.
It's a great subject, and let's think about it another time. Eh?
Yeah. We've got a couple more actually. So again, Chad Chapman is talking about we probably have to regulate AI first before we can start going autonomous.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It is a subject that's under discussion around the world, I think.
I think so too, yeah.
But certainly here, is that how do the machines take over?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I really can't answer that in a one-liner.
Yeah. And we've got the lucky last one. I've got one for you as well, but lucky last one from one of the viewers, Stephen again. Have you written any books for any manufacturers?
No. My well, I'm not going to say my brief, but my brief to myself is always that the books that I do will be generic, and they're primarily aimed at either students learning in a college or people who are working in the trade who want to know a bit more about things generically. The trouble is, if I specialize in any form of particular vehicle, for example, apart from anything, it's out of date 6 months later, as that vehicle sort of gets a bit older and things like that. So a straightforward answer, no, I try to keep things generic. Fundamentals of how things work rather than detailed specifics of car XYZ,
So I've got one for you on that topic as well, because obviously you've done a bit of teaching and sort of understand that a bit better with new tech sort of in the industry. Do you have any advice for a new tech coming in to our industry? If you had to give them a piece of advice.
Buy a textbook.
Yep.
That's it goes without saying, doesn't it? A range of textbooks is probably a good thing to buy.
Specifically something written by Tom Denton.
That's the one, yeah. You're getting the idea now of how this thing works. I think what I probably would say is don't think that you kind of do a few years. I mean, over here, it's like 3 years training, generally speaking, to become fully qualified. And then you're working on the tools, and you get a bit more experience and so on and so forth. Don't think that that's it. There's a huge range of options and different career paths that you can move into, or even, you could really specialize these days in electric vehicles or in driver assistance systems. So you could pick areas to become really specialist in. So keep your options open, and fundamentally and absolutely, and I still do this, so I practice what I preach, keep learning about what's going on. You don't go to college and then you finish learning and that's it. And I'm sure a lot of people will agree with that. So, keep looking at different options and different ways to go, because, perhaps I'm one example of it. There are lots of different, careers that you can take in the motor industry. And if I had my time round again, I'd do it again. I mean, I love the trade.
Oh, look, I think I totally agree with you. It's such a very good point. Very good point. Excellent. All right, guys. Any more questions? If not, one more. Are your books only in English? There you go. Lucky last.
There's sorry, I'm just trying to switch my screen back.
You're right.
Just bear with me a second. Stop sharing, just so I can get back on. There we go.
Yeah, excellent.
There's one or two have been translated here and there. There's work going on in Korea at the moment. So one of the books, a very early version of my diagnostic book got translated into Chinese Mandarin, but by all accounts, a terrible translation. So I think too much Google and not enough, human being was involved. But generally speaking, just in English, I'm afraid.
Cool. All right. I think that all about wraps us up. Well, thank you very much, Tom, from all of us from the Garage Network, obviously, for giving us that time of yours. For the guys that are watching, obviously, if you haven't got one book, go have a look at the website, buy one. If you've only got one, buy two or three, and share some love. So anything from you, Jeff? It works much better when you're not on mute, mate. Yeah, no, he's broken it. You've broken it. All right, cool, excellent. Thank you very much, Tom.
All right. Thanks, guys. Nice to meet everybody. And
cheers.
Keep in touch in the group. You know where
Absolutely.
we are. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Don't forget to join our private Facebook page if you are an automotive technician, and also subscribe to our YouTube and our podcast channel. They are all called The Garage Network. Thanks, guys, and see you next time.